All right, everyone. Welcome back to another module. I hope that you got a lot out of the structural, that you could use the principles that we talked about and that were presented to try to understand some of the video clips that you saw. We're going to do much the same thing in this video. I'm going to go through some of the material and tell you really clearly which parts of this you need to focus on, both for the exams and also in order to become successful at using Bowen. Hopefully you've seen by now that the theories are a way to understand human interactions. The reason that theories are important as we go through this is that if we look at research on people working with families, we can see that if you don't have a theory to ground you, that you can float all over and it is very ineffective in working with families. So the research on effectiveness of working with families says that if you have a theory to ground you, to keep you focused on what to be looking for and how to do something about it, you're going to be much better off. Now, there's always students who say, well, can't I just in the moment pick which theory seems to fit best? And the answer to that is research says that's not very effective. If you don't have the same kind of theory, if you don't have something grounded that says, this is how I'm going to interact and this is what I'm going to do in this situation, you float and you can change between them and it has the same outcome. The other question that students say is, does it matter which one that I choose? And later on, after you've covered the 4 theories, I'll do a video that talks about how you choose. But most of all, what's important is that you choose a theory that has the values and beliefs and ideas that are consistent with what you already think and believe. And so really it's less about what fits with the person you're trying to help and more about what fits with you. This will benefit you because it'll keep you grounded in what you already see, and it will capitalize on your strengths, I guess is the best way to put it. So over the course of the semester, you're going to have to choose one of the 4 theories that you're covering in these models. You're going to practice that theory, and it's going to be something that over the semester that you practice, you will get better and better at recognizing the characteristics that you need to be looking for in the patterns of family interaction. So this module covered Bowen. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the key principles that Bowen has described. But one of those that's really important is relational anxiety. Relationships are hard. Relationships can be difficult. And relational anxiety says that when relationships get stuck and when things happen, anxiety goes up. Hopefully you notice that when anxiety goes up, reason goes down. Now this, you can look back at the stuff we talked about for trauma and you can say, yeah, totally, that's what happens to the brain. When our trauma brain kicks in, our reasoning brain checks out. Okay, so Bowen's principles that he came up way before any good brain research was being done play out in what we find in the brain as far as what happens in trauma and anxiety. And so you need to be able to see anxiety as a relational component, as a relational characteristic. You also need to be able to see that in order to be reasonable with people, in order to reason and use logic with them, you've got to decrease their anxiety. So again, Bowen's theory fits very well with this idea that you have to decrease anxiety before you intervene. Now, there's really kind of a couple of core principles that you need to look for as a Bowen professional. So if you're a teacher or if you're a caseworker or if you're a therapist, if you're going to be operating from within this Bowen lens, there's a couple of really important key features that you need to pay attention to. One of them is that Bowen says problems occur as the balance of togetherness and individuality. Now he calls this the differentiation of self. So the ability to be part of a family and to be an individual within that family are 2 different characteristics. And so think about healthy families. Healthy families have individuals who have super unique interests and passions, and they also have things that the family does together as a group. And so it isn't that healthy families only do things together as a group, nor is it that healthy families only have their own individual interests. Now, the difference is that in that healthy family, when you have an individual activity, maybe somebody in the family loves science, when they have a science fair project or when they have some kind of demonstration, the rest of the family shows up to support it. If there's a member of the family that's into basketball and they have a basketball game, the rest of the family comes and supports it. Even if members of the family are not that interested in basketball or science, they come and support that because their sibling or their child or whoever is interested in it. And so one of the things that you'll see is that the balance of togetherness and individuality is a major focal point for Bowen theory. So if you're going to work with Bowen and you see things that are out of balance and that things that are causing stress, helping to reestablish balance will be really, really critical. We'll give you another example of this when we go to some videos. There's a video that's going to talk about divorce and separation and how you as professionals can try to help that family with that balance, especially the kiddos, because the kiddos are the people that really feel the instability of that togetherness and individuality the most. And so helping them to recognize that there's togetherness and they have togetherness within their family still, but that they are their own individuals and they can grow and learn and be safe and secure by themselves. So again, differentiation of self is about togetherness and individuality. The next point that's really important is intergenerational. Bowen is super big on intergenerational behavior. And so one of the things that if you're a Bowenian professional, one of the things you're going to always ask is, did you struggle with this? Did your parents struggle with this? And so if you're talking to parents about some bullying that's taking place, you ask the parents, did you ever experience bullying? And you want to look at how they reacted, okay? And so bullying is a good example because you might be thinking, well, just because they were bullied doesn't mean that that's what predicts whether a kid is going to be bullied. And that's not the point of asking the question. The point of asking the question is to then ask, how did you respond? What did people around you do when that happened? And to try to get a sense of, was that response to being bullied helpful? Was it supportive? Was it kind? Was it nurturing? And if it wasn't, how can you help them see that they can respond differently for their kid? And so the point is that people tend to do things the way that they saw their parents do them. This probably isn't a tough sell. You can probably, every single one of you, look at characteristics in your family and say, this is totally, we do this because this is the way grandma did it. Or this is the way grandpa did it. We do this because my mom's family does it this way, my dad's family does it this way. So the important part is that you're looking at those intergenerational characteristics. Now, genograms are a really important part of this. When we meet in class, we're going to spend some time going over genograms, and you're going to practice doing genogram on each other. You should practice genograms outside of class. You should just talk to people, draw your own family's genogram. A genogram is just a way to diagram a family. And there's some very clear characteristics in the module that tell you how to do this. It isn't that important that you get hung up on what the symbols are or anything. What's important is that you know how to diagram it so it stays clear what's going on. And you can get a lot of information in a genogram. When we used to meet every week in class, I would do a genogram with one person. And in 5 minutes, it's astounding how much information you can get and understand about this person's family just by diagramming their family on a piece of paper or with a board. So genograms are important to understand families in a quick hurry. One of the things that I think is really critical is if you are a teacher, you may only have 15, 20 minutes with a family. You don't have a lot of time to meander around and gather information. So if you have a tool that lets you understand the family in 3 to 5 minutes and have a really good depth and background of understanding, that's a tremendous asset to you. And so you want to practice genograms. Another thing I'll say about genograms is they're not only an asset or a tool that you can use if you are working from a Bowen lens. Every single one of the theories we use is going to try to create an understanding, a vision of what's going on in this family in order for you to be helpful. And so genograms, while they were created from Bowen's work, they aren't necessarily today only used if you're working from a Bowen lens. People from all different areas, whether that's cognitive behavioral or whether that's structural, use genograms to quickly and effectively understand the family. So practice some of those. Do a genogram on a roommate, do a genogram on a boyfriend or girlfriend, do a genogram on somebody random that you don't know very well. Just practice getting information from people about their families. Okay, another real critical characteristic of Bowen is that you navigate this intergenerational transmission effectively. And so when you're working from a Bowen lens, You're paying attention to that relational anxiety. You're thinking about where the problems are coming from intergenerationally. You're creating this togetherness and individuality that the person can both be themselves and they can be a part of the whole, the family. Okay. And those are really some of the main key points that I want you to practice with Bowen. Okay. Relational anxiety, togetherness and individuality, which is a differentiation of self, and the intergenerational transmission of problems, which you understand through genograms. Okay. So that's really critical. The last thing that I want to talk about is another segment on stuff about the brain. Okay, so the first time we talked about the 3 things that the brain shuts down when you're in trauma. Okay, that's reason, rational thinking, language, the ability to speak and articulate oneself clearly, and chronology, timelines. Okay, when that shuts down, the person's fully in trauma brain. I want to talk a minute about levels of trauma brain, and this is going to seem pretty logical to you. The trauma of an incident isn't always the same. Sometimes things are super scary, and sometimes they're just a little bit scary. When we are scared, when our body is scared, when we are scared and our brain reacts to it, okay, the first thing that happens is we go to a social support. We go for social support. Examples of this: if you're walking around a corner and somebody jumps out and scares you, you scream. Okay, a scream or a cry for babies is really a request for support from some other person. When babies cry, they're saying to their parents, I don't know how to communicate, but I don't feel good right now, whether I'm hungry or whether I have a messy diaper, whatever it is. So they cry, they get the attention, and the other person comes down and takes care of them, right? So if we're scared, the scream is the same function. It's just a cry for help, right? So our brain's first thing that's instinct, our first instinct is to scream for help or to look for social support or to yell for help. This is kind of the normal first response. The second thing that happens is we realize we got to do something to fight back. So if you run into a bear and you scream and the bear doesn't run away, you realize you got to either fight the bear or you got to get the heck out of there. Okay. And so the second level of danger, so first is social, the second level of danger is fight and flight. Okay. And this is where you either fight back or you run. Right. When you hit fight and flight mode, and we're going to go into a lot of depth later as far as what the body does, but when you're in fight or flight mode, your adrenaline kicks in. You have a lot more energy because you need that energy to either fight back or run and get out of there. Okay, so that accelerates what goes on in the body. Now, if the bear catches you, you will kick into freeze mode. When you kick into freeze mode, it does the opposite of fight or flight. Slows everything way down. It shuts the body down. Because what the brain's trying to do to you is it's trying to protect you from the horrors of whatever is happening to you. So if we're not talking about a bear, if we're talking about children, okay, and most of the abuse that happens to kids happens at the hands of somebody that they know. So fight or flight, if you're a 7-year-old, it's pretty difficult to fight back against an adult. It's also pretty difficult and scary to run away if that adult is somebody that you're supposed to be trusting, like a family member. And so what oftentimes happens when kids have prolonged exposure to abuse when they're children, when they're little, is that they learn to go straight to freeze mode. And so they don't get into fight or flight. They go straight, when they see danger, they go straight to shut down. And we'll describe what this physiologically, this fight or flight looks like and what freeze looks like. It has some really important ways that you can notice if that's what's happening. The other thing that's really important to take into account is that when people get into fight or flight mode, or when they get into freeze mode, it doesn't actually mean there's a legitimate danger in that moment. Because if they're sitting in your office, hopefully they're safe in your office. If they come into your classroom, hopefully they're safe in your classroom. But past trauma can trigger a response by something that gets said, a sound, a smell, anything can set it off. And so what you need to do is you need to be able to recognize when it's being set off, to recognize what's happening, and then be able to respond effectively. And so that's really the key of what we're trying to do in teaching you all this stuff about the brain. It isn't to suggest that the kid's going to be in danger and trauma in your classroom or in your office. What it's to suggest is that the kids that are going to have the most difficulty in your classroom or in your office are those whose trauma is going to be triggered by something that goes on. And then they and you are going to have to respond to it. Okay, so remember, the first response in danger is social. Scream, cry for help, yell for help. Okay, get help from others. If there's nobody else there, your brain's going to kick into fight or flight. Defend yourself or get the heck out of there. Okay, if there's no way to defend yourself, it's going to kick into freeze. And when an individual has been through a lot of trauma when they're a kid, because of size and capacity, they will oftentimes learn that the only solution is freeze. And so then even as adults, when they're in danger, they go straight to freeze. Okay, they'll go straight to shut down. And that's really important for you to know when you see a kiddo on your playground that goes straight to shutdown, or a kiddo in your office that goes straight to shutdown. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that for sure they have been abused. What that means is that somehow they've experienced some trauma in their life that they didn't feel like they had any control over. And because they didn't have any control over it, the only solution is freeze. Now, that trauma might have been a chronic illness of a family member. Grandma has cancer and there's nothing they can do to deal with it. And so they freeze. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean that the trauma is abuse. But when kids experience a lot of trauma or when people experience a lot of trauma as children, they tend to go to freeze mode quicker than fight or flight because it seems to be more effective. Now, once you're an adult, going straight to freeze mode can be really problematic. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that as time goes on. Okay, so recapping Bowen, the three main things that you're going to pay attention to: differentiation of self, which is really only a balance of togetherness and individuality; relational anxiety, that when relationships get anxious, people can't think clearly, and so you need to de-escalate it; and intergenerational transmission of problems. That genogram can help you understand that, but that problems occur from generation to generation. And we know that there's a lot of research that also supports that idea. I hope that this has been a helpful video. Please, if you come across problems, things that you're not understanding, reach out to me. I've gotten a few emails. Keep doing so if there's things that you need help with. And we will talk to you next time.